January 14, 1944. VMF-214 Black Sheep Squadron at Vella Lavella airstrip. F4U-1 Corsairs taxi through morning coral dust. Radio chatter crackles over Henderson Field frequencies. The mission is carved in stone. Engage the Japanese fighter sweeps over Bougainville and prove American pilots can turn with the legendary Zero. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero had carved terror across the Pacific for over 2 years. Its reputation preceded every dogfight like a death sentence written in aluminum and steel. Japanese pilots called it the divine wind made manifest, a machine that could outturn anything America put in the sky. At Rabaul, veteran Navy pilots whispered the sacred rule to every replacement arriving on transport ships from Pearl Harbor. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to dogfight a Zero in a turning engagement. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Zero weighed 5,313 pounds empty while the F4U Corsair tipped scales at 8,982 pounds. Physics dictated that in a sustained turning fight, the lighter, more maneuverable Zero would always position itself behind American aircraft for the killing shot. Captain Henry Bourgeois understood these numbers intimately as he strapped into the cockpit of his F4U-1 Corsair that humid morning at Vella Lavella. The 24-year-old Marine from Louisiana had logged 127 combat hours over the Solomons, witnessing firsthand what happened when American pilots ignored the tactical doctrine. Burning Wildcats spiraling into iron-bottom sound. P-40 Warhawks shredded by 20mm cannon fire over Henderson Field. The wreckage of American fighters scattered across coral reefs from Guadalcanal to New Georgia bore silent testimony to the Zero's dominance in turning combat. Yet Bourgeois carried a different kind of mathematics in his flight suit pocket. Ammunition loading charts developed by Gunnery Sergeant John Bull, whose innovative mixing of armor-piercing incendiary, ball, and tracer rounds had transformed the Corsair's 650 caliber Browning machine guns into instruments of mechanical devastation. Bull's formula called for every fifth round to be armor-piercing incendiary, creating a stream of projectiles that could punch through the Zero's unarmored fuel tanks and ignite aviation gasoline with surgical precision. The Japanese had built their fighters for maneuverability at the expense of protection, gambling that superior pilot skill would prevent enemy guns from finding their mark. That gamble was about to be tested against American industrial firepower and evolving tactical doctrine. The morning briefing at VMF-214's operations tent had been conducted by Major Gregory Boyington, the squadron commander whose drinking habits were as legendary as his shooting accuracy. Boyington's weathered face carried the marks of a man who had been killing Japanese fighters since the Flying Tigers days in China. His tactical philosophy was elegantly simple. The Zero could outturn the Corsair, but the Corsair could outdive, outclimb, and outgun the Zero at high speed. American pilots who followed boom and zoom tactics would live. Those who attempted sustained turning fights would die. The Japs think we're too heavy and too stupid to mix it up in close combat, Boyington had said, cigarette smoke curling from his lips as he gestured toward the intelligence photos of Rabaul airfields. They're half right. We are heavier, but that weight gives us speed and firepower they can't match. Use it. Lieutenant Robert Hansen nodded from his position near the tent's entrance. The 23-year-old from Texas had already accumulated 20 confirmed kills flying Corsairs over the Northern Solomons, making him one of the most successful Marine fighter pilots in the Pacific theater. Hansen's success came from his absolute adherence to energy fighting tactics. He would climb above Japanese formations, dive to attack speed, fire concentrated bursts into enemy aircraft, then climb away before the more maneuverable Zeros could respond. It was methodical, effective, and completely contrary to the romantic notion of aerial combat that Hollywood had embedded in American popular consciousness. But that morning's mission parameters demanded something different. Intelligence reports indicated that Colonel Saburo Sakai's veteran fighter group at Rabaul had been reinforced with 30 new A6M Model 52 Zeros, the latest variant with improved engine performance and strengthened wing structure. These aircraft were being flown by veteran pilots reassigned from carrier duty after the devastating losses at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Japanese tactical doctrine called for these experienced pilots to conduct aggressive fighter sweeps over Allied positions, drawing American fighters into turning engagements where Zero superiority could be demonstrated convincingly. The Japanese wanted a dogfight. VMF-214 intended to give them one. Bourgeois advanced throttles on his Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, feeling 2,000 horsepower translate into forward momentum that pressed him against his armor-plated seat. The Corsair's distinctive inverted gull wings cut through humid tropical air as the formation of 12 fighters climbed northwest toward the Russell Islands. At 15,000 feet, the temperature dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and Bourgeois could see his breath misting inside the cockpit despite the blazing Pacific sun above the cloud layer. Radio discipline maintained silence except for essential navigation updates. The flight was proceeding according to standard doctrine. Maintain formation integrity, preserve fuel consumption, and avoid premature engagement with Japanese fighters until tactical advantage could be established. Boyington's voice crackled over the radio net at precise intervals, providing course corrections and altitude changes as the formation approached the combat zone. At 0847 hours, Rabaul radar operators detected the incoming American formation and scrambled 18 A6M Zeros from the 582nd Fighter Group under the command of Lieutenant Commander Tetsuzo Iwamoto. Iwamoto was among Japan's most successful fighter pilots, credited with 80 confirmed aerial victories flying Zeros from carriers and land bases throughout the Pacific campaign. His tactical philosophy emphasized aggressive maneuvering combat that exploited the Zero's superior turning radius to position Japanese fighters behind enemy aircraft for decisive attacks. The stage was set for the kind of engagement that American tactical doctrine explicitly prohibited. As the two formations converged over the Solomon Sea at 18,000 feet altitude, radio chatter between Japanese pilots revealed their confidence in the coming engagement. Flight recordings recovered after the war captured Iwamoto's instructions to his pilots. American fighters are heavy and clumsy. Force them into turning combat and destroy them systematically. Japanese pilots had been briefed that Corsair pilots were trained to avoid dogfighting, making them vulnerable to aggressive maneuvering attacks that denied them the opportunity to disengage. This intelligence was accurate. It was also about to become tragically obsolete. Bourgeois spotted the Japanese formation first, 18 silver dots climbing from the northwest against a backdrop of cumulus clouds building over New Britain. The range was approximately 4 miles, with both formations approaching head-on at a combined closure rate of over 600 miles per hour. In exactly 36 seconds, 12 Corsairs and 18 Zeros would merge in the kind of aerial combat that had defined Pacific air warfare for 2.5 years. Boyington's voice cut through radio static with the simplicity of a death warrant. Tally-ho, Zeros, 2 o'clock high. Let's go get them. The American formation broke into 3 sections of 4 aircraft each, with Bourgeois leading the second element alongside his wingman, Lieutenant Charles Lanfear. Their mission was to engage the center section of the Japanese formation, while Boyington's section attacked from above and Hansen's section maneuvered for altitude advantage. Standard tactics called for vertical separation and boom and zoom attacks that would prevent the Zeros from bringing their superior maneuverability into play. Instead, something unprecedented happened. As the formations merged at 17,500 feet, the Japanese pilots immediately began hard-turning maneuvers designed to force the Corsairs into horizontal combat. Iwamoto's Zero pulled into a steep left bank, bleeding airspeed rapidly as he attempted to position his aircraft behind Boyington's Corsair for a deflection shot. 3 more Zeros followed this maneuver, creating a rotating engagement pattern that should have given them decisive tactical advantage. Bourgeois made a decision that violated every principle of American fighter tactics. Instead of extending out of the engagement to preserve energy advantage, he pulled his Corsair into a hard right turn to meet the Japanese maneuver directly. His aircraft shuddered under 6G forces as he hauled back on the control stick, watching his airspeed indicator drop from 380 miles per hour to 220 miles per hour in less than 4 seconds. Lanfear's voice cut through the radio net with alarm and disbelief. "Hank, what the hell are you doing? Extend and climb out." The warning came too late. Bourgeois was already committed to a turning fight with 3 A6M Zeros, whose pilots possessed a combined total of over 200 combat hours and 45 confirmed aerial victories. By every calculation of aircraft performance, pilot experience, and tactical doctrine, the engagement should have ended with his Corsair burning in the Solomon Sea within 90 seconds. Physics, however, had not accounted for John Bull's ammunition loading innovation. As Bourgeois rolled into the turn, his Corsair's superior engine power became apparent. The R-2800 Double Wasp continued producing maximum horsepower even as airspeed decreased, allowing the American fighter to maintain turn radius competitive with the lighter Zeros. More crucially, the Corsair's superior roll rate allowed Bourgeois to reverse direction faster than his Japanese opponents could follow, creating brief firing opportunities that negated the Zero's theoretical advantage. The first burst came at 800 yards range as Iwamoto's Zero pulled lead pursuit in what should have been a killing shot. Bourgeois triggered his guns for exactly 12 seconds, sending 72 rounds of mixed ammunition streaming toward the Japanese fighter. Standard ball ammunition would have required direct hits on critical components to achieve kills against enemy aircraft. Bull's armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the Zero's unarmored structure and detonated inside the fuel tank behind the cockpit. The explosion was instantaneous and total. Iwamoto's aircraft disappeared in a ball of orange flame and black smoke that left no trace except burning debris falling toward the ocean 17,000 feet below. The engagement had lasted exactly 14 seconds. Two more Zeros immediately converged on Bourgeois' position, using standard Japanese tactics that called for coordinated attacks from multiple angles to overwhelm single enemy fighters. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto approached from the left quarter, while Warrant Officer Hiroshi Matsuda attacked from the right, both pilots executing the kind of coordinated maneuver that had destroyed countless American fighters over the past 2 years. Bourgeois responded with a maneuver that should have been impossible in a 9,000-pound fighter aircraft. He rolled inverted, pulled through a split-S maneuver that reversed his direction completely, and emerged behind both attacking Zeros with firing position on Yamamoto's aircraft. The entire maneuver required exactly 38 seconds and demonstrated aircraft handling characteristics that Japanese intelligence had deemed impossible for American fighters. The second kill came at 400 yards range as Yamamoto's Zero attempted to disengage with a climbing left turn. Bourgeois triggered another short burst, watching his incendiary rounds tear through the Japanese fighter's wing root and detonate the ammunition storage compartment. The Zero rolled inverted and went into an unrecoverable spin, shedding pieces of wing structure as it tumbled toward the ocean. Matsuda's attack came from directly behind at 300 yards range, his 20mm cannon rounds walking up toward the Corsair's engine compartment in a pattern that should have been fatal. Instead, Bourgeois executed a barrel roll that carried his aircraft clear of the firing cone while maintaining forward momentum. As he completed the maneuver, he found himself in perfect firing position on the Zero starboard quarter. The third burst lasted 8 seconds and sent 48 rounds into the Japanese fighter's cockpit area. The armor-piercing incendiary ammunition shredded the unprotected pilot compartment and ignited the oxygen system, creating a white-hot fire that consumed the entire forward fuselage. Matsuda's Zero exploded so close to Bourgeois' aircraft that metal fragments peppered his port wing and cracked the plexiglass canopy, but the Corsair continued flying without degraded performance. In less than 2 minutes of aerial combat, Bourgeois had shot down 3 experienced Japanese pilots flying the most maneuverable fighter aircraft in the Pacific theater. He had done so using tactics that American doctrine explicitly prohibited, achieving results that aircraft performance calculations suggested were impossible. The engagement was far from over. Across the combat area, similar scenarios were playing out as other Corsair pilots discovered that months of conservative tactical doctrine had underestimated their aircraft's capabilities in close combat. Lieutenant Charles Lanfear found himself engaged with 2 Zeros over Vella Lavella, using aggressive maneuvering that kept pace with Japanese tactics while exploiting the Corsair's superior firepower. His first kill came during a head-on pass that lasted exactly 14 seconds, with armor-piercing incendiary rounds detonating the Zero's engine and killing the pilot instantly. Major Boyington was engaged with 4 Zeros simultaneously, demonstrating the kind of aggressive flying that had made him legendary among Marine pilots. His tactical approach combined elements of boom and zoom attacks with sustained turning combat, using the Corsair's superior engine power to maintain energy while matching Japanese maneuverability. When 1 Zero pilot attempted to force a head-on engagement, Boyington held course until the last possible moment before firing a concentrated burst that literally disintegrated the enemy aircraft at 200 yards range. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was immediate and devastating. Since December 1941, Zero pilots had dominated aerial combat through superior aircraft performance and aggressive tactics that exploited American reluctance to engage in turning fights. Suddenly, they faced American fighters that not only matched their maneuverability but exceeded their firepower by devastating margins. The tactical paradigm that had defined Pacific air warfare was collapsing in real time. Lieutenant Commander Iwamoto's replacement, Captain Naoshi Kano, attempted to rally the remaining Japanese fighters for a coordinated attack on the American formation. Radio intercepts captured his transmission. All aircraft, maintain formation discipline. American fighters cannot sustain turning combat. The message reflected Japanese tactical doctrine that remained confident in Zero superiority despite mounting evidence to the contrary. That confidence was about to be shattered permanently. Robert Hansen's section had climbed to 22,000 feet during the initial engagement, positioning themselves for classic boom and zoom attacks on Japanese fighters engaged with other Corsairs. As Hansen rolled into his attack dive, airspeed increasing past 450 miles per hour, he spotted 5 Zeros attempting to reform for another attack on Bourgeois' section. The tactical situation was ideal for vertical attacks that would exploit the Corsairs' superior diving speed while avoiding the Zeros' maneuvering advantages. Instead, Hansen made a decision that redefined American fighter tactics in the Pacific theater. Rather than executing hit-and-run attacks, he pulled his Corsair into a sustained engagement with all 5 Japanese fighters simultaneously. The resulting combat lasted over 6 minutes and demonstrated aircraft capabilities that both American and Japanese pilots had considered impossible. Hansen's Corsair remained competitive in turning radius while using superior engine power to maintain energy advantage throughout the engagement. His first kill came during a vertical scissors maneuver that saw both aircraft climbing and diving repeatedly while attempting to gain firing position. The Zero pilot, Warrant Officer Takashi Yamamoto, was a veteran of carrier operations with 23 confirmed victories flying from Zuikaku and Shokaku. His tactical skill was exceptional, but his aircraft's lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks became fatal vulnerabilities when exposed to Bull's innovative ammunition loading. Hansen's burst at 600 yards range sent armor-piercing incendiary rounds through the Zero's wing root and into the main fuel tank. The explosion was visible from 5 miles away as aviation gasoline ignited with the force of a bomb detonation. Yamamoto's aircraft ceased to exist as a coherent structure, leaving only burning debris scattered across 2 square miles of ocean. The remaining 4 Zeros immediately converged on Hansen's position using standard Japanese tactics that called for overwhelming single enemy fighters through coordinated attacks from multiple angles. Captain Kano led the attack from above while 3 other pilots approached from the left, right, and directly behind Hansen's Corsair. It was a textbook execution of proven tactics that had destroyed hundreds of American fighters since Pearl Harbor. Hansen's response demonstrated why American industrial capacity and technological innovation were beginning to tilt the balance of Pacific air warfare. Instead of attempting to evade the coordinated attack, he used the Corsair's superior roll rate to engage each enemy aircraft individually while maintaining defensive position against the others. His aircraft became a platform for sequential gunnery attacks that exploited Japanese tactical coordination against itself. As Kano's Zero dove from above, Hansen rolled inverted and pulled into a climbing spiral that brought his guns to bear for exactly 6 seconds. 29 rounds of mixed ammunition struck the Japanese fighter's engine compartment and cockpit area, killing Kano instantly and sending his aircraft into a vertical dive that terminated in the ocean 20,000 feet below. The 3 remaining Zeros pressed their attacks with the desperation of pilots who suddenly understood that their tactical superiority was evaporating. Warrant Officer Jiro Suzuki attempted a beam attack from the right quarter, timing his approach to intersect Hansen's flight path at minimum range. His 20mm cannon rounds passed within inches of the Corsair's cockpit, close enough to crack the plexiglass and shower Hansen with glass fragments. Hansen's response was immediate and lethal. He rolled hard right into Suzuki's attack, using the Corsair's superior roll rate to position his guns for a deflection shot that required precise timing and exceptional marksmanship. The burst lasted exactly 11 seconds and sent 66 rounds into the Zero's port wing and fuselage. Armor-piercing incendiary ammunition detonated the aircraft's ammunition storage, creating an explosion that scattered burning fragments across a quarter-mile radius. Two Zeros remained, both piloted by veterans with over 100 combat hours and multiple confirmed victories. They executed a coordinated attack pattern that approached Hansen's Corsair from opposite quarters simultaneously, creating a crossing pattern that should have been impossible to counter. Japanese tactical doctrine called this maneuver the Scissors of Death, because it forced enemy pilots to choose which attacker to engage while exposing themselves to the other. Hansen chose both. Using energy management techniques that exploited the Corsair's superior engine power, he climbed vertically while rolling to engage first one attacker, then the other. His aircraft maintained sufficient airspeed throughout the maneuver to keep guns on target while preventing either Zero from achieving stable firing position. The engagement lasted 43 seconds and required aircraft handling that pushed both man and machine to their absolute limits. The fourth kill came as Warrant Officer Masahiko Fujita attempted to follow Hansen's climb in a maneuver that bled the Zero's airspeed below sustainable levels. As Fujita's aircraft stalled and began to fall away, Hansen rolled over the top and dove directly behind the helpless fighter. His guns fired for 15 seconds at point-blank range, sending 90 rounds into the Zero's cockpit and engine compartment. The Japanese fighter exploded with such violence that metal fragments punctured Hansen's port wing in 17 places, but the Corsair continued flying without degraded performance. The final Zero, piloted by Lieutenant Yoshio Nakajima, attempted to disengage from the combat area using a high-speed dive toward Rabaul. Japanese tactical doctrine called for breaking off unsuccessful engagements to preserve aircraft and pilots for future operations. Nakajima's Zero accelerated past 400 miles per hour in the dive, approaching the maximum speed where Japanese fighters could maintain structural integrity. The Corsair's superior diving characteristics became decisive. Hansen's aircraft accelerated past 480 miles per hour as he pursued the fleeing Zero, his heavier weight and more powerful engine providing significant speed advantage at high velocity. The gap closed steadily as both fighters dove toward sea level, with Hansen's guns coming into range at 12,000 feet altitude. The pursuit lasted over 3 minutes and covered 18 miles of airspace above the Solomon Sea. Nakajima attempted every evasive maneuver available to Zero pilots. Barrel rolls, split S-turns, radical changes in direction that exploited his aircraft's superior turning radius. None proved effective against an opponent who could match his maneuverability while exceeding his speed and firepower. The final burst came at 800 feet altitude as both aircraft pulled out of their high-speed dive. Hansen triggered his guns for exactly 21 seconds, sending 126 rounds into the Zero's rear fuselage and wing structure. The armor-piercing incendiary ammunition shredded the Japanese fighter's control surfaces and ignited the fuel tank, creating a fireball that forced Hansen to climb rapidly to avoid the explosion's debris field. Nakajima's Zero crashed into the Solomon Sea with such force that the impact crater was visible from 5 miles away. The pilot's body was never recovered. In 18 minutes of aerial combat, Robert Hansen had shot down 5 experienced Japanese pilots flying the most advanced variant of the Zero fighter. He had done so using sustained maneuvering combat that American tactical doctrine considered suicidal. His ammunition expenditure totaled 413 rounds, demonstrating shooting accuracy that exceeded normal standards by significant margins. Across the combat area, other Corsair pilots were achieving similar results. The engagement that began as a routine fighter sweep had become a tactical revolution that redefined American capabilities in Pacific air warfare. By 09:15 hours, VMF-214 had shot down 16 Japanese fighters while losing only 1 Corsair to ground fire during the return flight to Vella Lavella. The psychological impact on Japanese pilot morale was catastrophic and permanent. Captain Saburo Sakai's post-combat report to Rabaul operations described the engagement in terms that revealed Japanese understanding of their changing tactical situation. American fighters demonstrated maneuverability competitive with Zero aircraft while maintaining superior firepower and armor protection. Previous tactical doctrine requires immediate revision. The report represented official admission that Japanese fighter superiority was ending. Radio intercepts captured conversations between surviving Japanese pilots that illuminated the psychological trauma of the engagement. Flight Petty Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's leading fighter ace with 87 confirmed victories, transmitted to Rabaul control. American fighters turned with us and shot us down like sitting ducks. This is not possible according to our intelligence reports. His voice carried the bewilderment of a pilot whose fundamental understanding of aerial combat had been shattered in 18 minutes. The ammunition innovation developed by Gunnery Sergeant John Bull had transformed the tactical equation of Pacific air warfare. Where previous engagements required multiple hits to achieve kills against Japanese fighters, the mixed loading of armor-piercing incendiary, ball, and tracer rounds could destroy enemy aircraft with single accurate bursts. More significantly, the psychological effect of watching aircraft literally explode upon impact created terror among Japanese pilots who had never experienced such devastating firepower. Bull's innovation emerged from systematic analysis of combat damage reports and ammunition effectiveness studies conducted throughout 1943. His background as a competitive marksman and ballistics expert led him to question standard military ammunition loading that prioritized consistency over lethality. By mixing different round types in specific ratios, he created ammunition streams that combined the penetrating power of armor-piercing rounds with the incendiary effect of explosive projectiles and the ranging capability of tracer ammunition. The technical specifications were elegant in their simplicity. Every fifth round was armor-piercing incendiary, designed to penetrate enemy aircraft structure and detonate inside fuel tanks or ammunition storage areas. Standard ball ammunition filled the gaps between incendiary rounds, providing consistent accuracy and penetrating power against aircraft components. Tracer rounds comprised every 10th projectile, allowing pilots to observe shot placement and adjust aim during combat. Japanese aircraft designers had created fighters that prioritized maneuverability and range over protection, gambling that superior pilot skill would prevent enemy guns from achieving hits. The Zero's lack of armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and fire suppression systems became fatal vulnerabilities when exposed to Bull's enhanced ammunition. Where previous American fighters required sustained fire to achieve kills, Corsairs equipped with mixed ammunition loading could destroy enemy aircraft with brief, accurate bursts. The tactical implications were revolutionary. American pilots no longer needed to avoid close combat with Japanese fighters. The Corsairs' combination of competitive maneuverability, superior engine power, and devastating firepower allowed aggressive tactics that matched Japanese aggressiveness while exceeding Japanese destructive capability. Fighter combat in the Pacific theater was entering a new phase where American aircraft could dominate through technological superiority rather than tactical caution. Intelligence reports reaching Admiral Chester Nimitz at Pacific Fleet Headquarters described the engagement in terms that reflected changing strategic calculations. Marine Fighter Squadron VMF-214 achieved 16 confirmed aerial victories against experienced Japanese pilots flying latest variant Zero fighters. American losses totaled 1 aircraft to ground fire. Tactical doctrine regarding fighter combat requires immediate review and revision. The implications extended beyond individual engagements to the broader strategic balance of Pacific air warfare. Japanese fighter strength had been eroding steadily since the Battle of the Philippine Sea, where over 400 experienced pilots were killed in 3 days of carrier operations. The remaining veteran pilots represented irreplaceable assets, whose loss would cripple Japanese air defense capabilities throughout the theater. The engagement over the Solomons demonstrated that American fighter pilots could now destroy these irreplaceable assets in sustained combat using aircraft and tactics that exceeded Japanese capabilities. The strategic balance was shifting from Japanese pilot superiority to American industrial and technological dominance that could replace losses while inflicting unsustainable casualties on enemy forces. At Rabaul, Colonel Sakai's operational report to higher headquarters reflected Japanese understanding of their deteriorating position. American fighter capabilities have exceeded previous intelligence estimates. Zero aircraft no longer possess decisive advantage in maneuvering combat. Recommend immediate tactical revision to preserve remaining pilot strength. The message represented official acknowledgement that Japanese fighter supremacy in the Pacific theater was ending. The broader implications reached Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, where Admiral Somu Toyota reviewed combat reports with growing alarm. Japanese aircraft production was struggling to replace combat losses while American industrial capacity was accelerating beyond all previous estimates. The combination of American numerical superiority with demonstrated qualitative equality in fighter combat created strategic problems that Japanese war planners could not solve. American pilot confidence underwent a corresponding transformation that affected operations throughout the Pacific theater. The traditional reluctance to engage Japanese fighters in close combat evaporated as word spread through Marine and Navy squadrons that Corsairs could outfight Zeros using proper tactics and ammunition. Fighter pilots who had spent months avoiding sustained engagements suddenly possessed aircraft and weapons that encouraged aggressive action. Lieutenant Colonel Gregory Boyington's after-action report captured this psychological shift. Marine pilots demonstrated that American fighters can engage Japanese aircraft in any type of combat and achieve superior results. Previous tactical restrictions based on aircraft performance limitations are no longer applicable. Recommend immediate revision of fighter doctrine to exploit demonstrated American advantages. The tactical revolution initiated by VMF-214 spread rapidly through Marine and Navy fighter squadrons as Bull's ammunition loading techniques were adopted throughout the Pacific Fleet. By February 1944, over 200 Corsair and Hellcat fighters were equipped with mixed ammunition loading that transformed their lethality against Japanese aircraft. Combat reports documented dramatically improved kill ratios as American pilots discovered they could destroy enemy fighters with single accurate bursts rather than sustained fire. Training programs at fighter schools in Hawaii and California incorporated lessons learned from the Solomon Islands engagement, teaching new pilots that aggressive maneuvering combat was not only possible but preferred when facing Japanese fighters. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical changes, creating a generation of American fighter pilots who approached aerial combat with confidence rather than caution. Japanese response to the changing tactical situation reflected growing desperation as pilot losses accelerated beyond sustainable levels. Rabaul operations reduced fighter sweeps over Allied positions to preserve remaining aircraft and personnel for essential defensive missions. When Japanese fighters did engage American formations, they increasingly relied on hit-and-run attacks that avoided sustained combat where American firepower advantages proved decisive. The strategic implications became apparent in subsequent operations as American air superiority expanded throughout the Pacific theater. Japanese air defenses at Truk, Guam, and the Philippines faced American fighter formations that possessed both numerical and qualitative advantages. The combination proved overwhelming as Japanese air power collapsed under sustained attack by pilots who no longer feared close combat with Zero fighters. By March 1944, American fighter pilots had shot down over 500 Japanese aircraft using tactics that violated every principle of pre-war doctrine. The aggressive maneuvering combat that Bull's ammunition innovation enabled had reversed the tactical balance of Pacific air warfare. Japanese pilots who had dominated American fighters for over 2 years suddenly found themselves outmatched by aircraft they had previously considered inferior. The personal cost of this tactical revolution was measured in individual stories of pilots whose careers were transformed by changing combat capabilities. Captain Henry Bourgeois returned from the Solomon Islands engagement with 3 confirmed victories and a changed understanding of what American aircraft could accomplish. His subsequent missions over Rabaul, Bougainville, and New Guinea demonstrated consistent success using aggressive tactics that would have been considered suicidal 6 months earlier. Bourgeois' combat record expanded to 14 confirmed victories by April 1944, making him one of the leading Marine fighter aces in the Pacific theater. His tactical approach influenced other pilots throughout VMF-214 and neighboring squadrons, spreading techniques that maximized the Corsairs' newfound capabilities against Japanese opposition. The ripple effects of his individual success contributed to broader American air superiority that accelerated Japanese defeat throughout the Pacific. Lieutenant Robert Hansen's career trajectory illustrated similar transformation as his individual success reflected changing strategic balance. His 5 victories during the Solomon Islands engagement were followed by additional successes over Bougainville, New Britain, and the Admiralty Islands that brought his total to 25 confirmed kills by June 1944. His aggressive flying and accurate shooting became legendary among Marine pilots who adopted his techniques for their own operations. The human cost of aerial combat remained significant despite American tactical advantages. Japanese pilots continued fighting with skill and determination that extracted casualties from American formations even as the strategic balance shifted decisively. Zero fighters retained their basic maneuverability advantages, and experienced Japanese pilots could still exploit American mistakes to achieve individual victories. The difference was that American losses could be replaced while Japanese casualties represented irreplaceable assets whose destruction accelerated imperial collapse. Every experienced Japanese pilot killed over the Solomons or Rabaul was a loss that Japanese training programs could not replace within acceptable timeframes. American pilot training, supported by industrial capacity that produced thousands of new aircraft monthly, could sustain combat operations indefinitely while Japanese capabilities eroded steadily. Statistical analysis of Pacific air combat after January 1944 revealed the mathematical foundation of American victory. Japanese aircraft were being destroyed at rates exceeding 10:1 in many engagements, with pilot casualties running even higher as American ammunition lethality eliminated opportunities for successful bailouts. The actuarial reality was that Japanese air power was being consumed faster than it could be regenerated, creating a death spiral that would culminate in total collapse. Individual combat reports documented the human dimension of these statistics as American pilots described engagements where Japanese aircraft literally exploded upon impact with mixed ammunition streams. The psychological effect on Japanese pilot morale became apparent in radio intercepts that captured conversations between surviving aircrew returning to base. Fear and bewilderment replaced the confidence that had characterized Japanese fighter operations since Pearl Harbor. At the strategic level, American air superiority enabled operations that would have been impossible during the early war period when Japanese fighter dominance constrained Allied planning. The successful invasion of the Marshall Islands, the neutralization of Truk, and the advance toward the Philippines all depended on American fighter capabilities that could suppress Japanese air opposition while providing cover for ground and naval operations. The tactical revolution initiated by Bull's ammunition innovation and demonstrated by pilots like Bourgeois and Hansen had strategic consequences that extended beyond individual engagements to the entire trajectory of Pacific warfare. Japanese air power, which had seemed invincible in 1942, was collapsing under assault by American fighter pilots who no longer feared close combat with the legendary Zero. By war's end, American fighter pilots had shot down over 15,000 Japanese aircraft while demonstrating combat capabilities that revolutionized aerial warfare doctrine. The aggressive maneuvering tactics that emerged from the Solomon Islands engagement became standard procedure for fighter operations throughout the Pacific theater, contributing to American victory through technological innovation and tactical evolution that transformed the strategic balance of air combat. The personal relationships that emerged from this period of intense combat created bonds that transcended national boundaries and political conflicts. Years after the war's conclusion, several American and Japanese pilots who had fought each other over the Pacific established friendships based on mutual respect and shared understanding of aerial combat's demands. These relationships illustrated that professional competence and personal courage could bridge even the deepest wartime divisions. Captain Henry Bourgeois maintained correspondence with several Japanese pilots he had encountered during combat operations, including former Zero pilot Saburo Sakai, whose post-war aviation career included flight instruction and aircraft testing. Their friendship, based on shared experiences and mutual respect for each other's flying abilities, demonstrated that the fierce competition of aerial combat could evolve into enduring personal relationships when the shooting stopped. The technical lessons learned from Pacific fighter combat influenced aircraft design and tactical doctrine for decades after the war's conclusion. Bull's ammunition innovations were incorporated into standard military practice, while the aggressive maneuvering tactics pioneered by Marine pilots became fundamental elements of fighter training programs. The revolution that began over the Solomon Islands in January 1944 continued shaping air combat doctrine through the jet age and beyond. The strategic implications of American fighter superiority extended to the broader conduct of Pacific warfare as Japanese air defenses collapsed under sustained attack by pilots who possessed both numerical and qualitative advantages. The invasion of Iwo Jima, the conquest of Okinawa, and the strategic bombing campaign against Japan itself all depended on American fighter capabilities that had been demonstrated first in the skies over the Solomon Islands. When the war ended in August 1945, American fighter pilots had achieved air superiority so complete that Japanese aircraft rarely appeared over their own territory. The transformation from defensive tactics designed to avoid Japanese fighters to aggressive operations that sought out and destroyed enemy aircraft represented one of the most significant tactical evolutions in military history. It began with ammunition innovation and tactical courage demonstrated by individual pilots who refused to accept limitations that others considered permanent. The legacy of that transformation lived on in the confidence and capability of American fighter pilots, who understood that technological innovation and tactical aggression could overcome any enemy advantage. The lesson would prove relevant in subsequent conflicts where American air power faced different challenges but drew upon the same foundation of innovation and determination that had revolutionized Pacific air warfare. In the end, the Japanese mockery of American fighter capabilities had been answered with devastating finality. The Corsair pilots who were told never to dogfight a Zero had instead chosen to engage the enemy on his own terms and win through superior firepower, innovative tactics, and uncompromising aggression. Their success changed the course of a war and created tactical doctrine that would influence aerial combat for generations to come. The mathematics were elegantly simple. American industrial capacity plus technological innovation plus pilot determination equaled Japanese defeat. The equation played out over thousands of individual engagements where American fighters met Japanese aircraft and emerged victorious through capabilities that their enemies had fatally underestimated. The mockery had become reality, and the sky belonged to America.